Morning. Hey, we've got a lot of stuff going on with Epic City, an Islamic, I guess, community that is being built east of Plano. What can you tell us about it?
Well, this is actually going on all over the state. I'm sure you know there's a few other examples as well. And if you take a map out and look, you'll see that these developers are basically proliferating these Muslim cities or compounds all over the state. And you know what you see going on now is this very targeted approach by both the Attorney General of Texas, the Housing and Urban Development at the federal level, as well as the governor and others, to find a way to kind of get this under control because they're metastasizing.
Well, in what I'm reading here from your article over at the DallasExpress.com, you guys go and check that out, get the app, that they're discriminating religiously against anybody else other than the Islamic faith.
Yeah, I think that if anybody that's being intellectually honest and has paid attention to the types of things that have been going on in other parts of the country and as well as Europe, as you know, London's a great example. This is very targeted. I mean, they're planting these communities in semi-rural or rural areas where there's actually not a large concentration of Islamic or Muslim people, and they're basing them around mosques, and then they're basically these huge master plan communities which are highly restricted towards other Muslims. And that's the basis of the argument by Scott Turner, of course, is the Cabinet Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, in terms of trying to find legal ways, because as you know, there's some constitutionality issues in terms of dealing with this problem, and they're very sophisticated in terms of how they manage around some of those issues. So in this case, there's probably no question that they're discriminating on the basis of religion themselves. And that's one of the angles that they're taking to try to get some regulations or prevent these communities altogether.
Well, we know we've got some H-1B type issues in Plano. You've been talking about the town halls. Is government going to step in here, or are they on the same team?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's fair to say that until this issue became kind of palpable, and I'm back to Sharia cities or these Muslim compounds as opposed to H1. But until it became palpable and it became transparent in terms of the fact that proliferating these communities is purposeful, I think there was quite a bit of assistance, that at least at the state level, the government was providing. It looked very much a couple of years ago, I think, to some people as like an economic development opportunity. And I think there's been stories about, certain politicians in the state of Texas actually accepting money from some of these groups, leveraging the Texas Economic Development Corporation to help, plan some of these communities. But it was a different time, and I don't know that there was a clear understanding at that time about the real intent here by, some of these groups. I mean, they absolutely want to do what they've done in Minnesota and create these communities, come in and take over the local governments. In the case of or in the case of Epic, basically they voted to extend that municipal utility district and then fire the entire board and plan a new board on it. That's absolutely unique and specific to, that one particular religious group.
Well, let's talk about that, because you describe it in the article here. They met at a GPS location. The entire board resigned and a new one was elected?
Yeah. As I mentioned, they're pretty sophisticated in terms of how they do these things, and they're very quiet. I mean, I think it's fair to say it's sneaky. Yeah, so they meet in an undisclosed location that can only be identified by GPS coordinates, fire the board, and then vote on a new one. Yeah, that happened. Well, that was September of last year. It was literally like an intersection in the middle of the country. There was like no facility there.
If you're a resident of the county of Plano, of this area, and you're not of the Muslim faith, I mean, the Islamic faith here, what are you thinking right now?
Well, it's a good question, in terms of how aware some people are. My understanding, I haven't been out to Kaufman lately, but I understand that there is a growing awareness of the situation and obviously growing concern. And again, they're manipulating state law in this case they should have formed a new utility district and done it in a very public and transparent way. In this case, they simply look to expand it to avoid state oversight. And so, I think it's fair to say that, as you know, like particularly here in the heat of election silly season, there's a lot of talk about Islamization and as well as the proliferation of these communities. So I do believe that there's a growing awareness. I think the real trick is to avoid these, constitutional issues. It's going to take, multiple agencies like you're seeing here with the coordination, between the Attorney General's office and HUD and others to try to find a legal way to get this stuff under control before it's out of control.
Well, I want to ask the question that you kind of just led into. It seems like not a lot of attention is being paid to what's actually happening, but you're also talking constitutionally, and it seems like the board may not be legal and there's a lawsuit. And how long do you think this is going to take, and what are we looking at?
Well, what you're always working against, of course, is we have the far left media out there, right? And they're gonna accuse people of being biased or bigots or racist or whatever they're cooking up at the moment to get people all spun up. But again, if you're being intellectually honest, and you see the use cases in different parts of the country, it's just impossible to deny that this is absolutely purposeful. They're planting themselves now and not just in urban communities. If you've seen a map of the Dallas-Fort Worth area, like it's crazy, the number of these mosques and communities that have been developed and that are proliferating. Epic City, of course, is just the most high-profile use case. They're all over the place. There's one being contemplated right now in the middle of a residential area in Fort Worth, Texas. And so, awareness is there. Finding the legal means to stop them is a different issue. And of course, the real concern is that in these communities, they are practicing a form of Sharia law. And again, they do it in a really sophisticated way. They have mediators that are legal mediators, that they hire attorneys. And once they've, resolved whatever the issue is between members of that community, they literally go file those cases in Dallas County, for example, at the county courthouse. And so in that sense, they're bypassing both state and federal law.
Chris, we got a lawsuit. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is going after this double R municipal utilities district over at Epic City that we were talking about. My question is, we got the Attorney General doing something. What's the Texas government doing?
Oh, the Texas government outside of the Attorney General's office?
Yes.
I don't know that there's a lot they can do. I mean, it's up to the Attorney General, obviously to find the legal means with which to prosecute. In this case, they're mostly, investigating or suing on the basis of them evading, state laws that relates to the municipal utility district and how they're going about it, as we discussed. The legislature, if that's what you're asking, they're obviously not in session, right now, but next year I think there will be a lot of attention to finding ways, in order to prevent these, strictly Muslim communities, and as well as probably a lot of investigation into a lot of the developers that are, behind some of these communities. I think it'll be a high priority of the next legislative session to, figure out a way that, these things could be either more highly regulated or prevented altogether.
Well, and that's why I asked. I mean, you've got the government here who is obviously in charge of development, permits, these utility districts, that sort of stuff. I understand that it is out of session, but I'm also understanding that Texas bans Sharia court for divorces, but that's it.
Yeah. And again, here, this lawsuit is specific to evading state oversight, right? And one of the ways that, obviously, you can have community input on some of these developments is just like any other zoning case. Like I was a city councilman, as you know, at one point, and we sit there and decide a lot of zoning cases, and we listen to our residents in terms of what we approve and not approve. The problem is they're not being very transparent about the process. Per what we discussed in the previous segment, I mean, they're literally meeting in the middle of an intersection of a country road that's only identified by GPS coordinates and playing games to expand the utility district rather than create a new one, firing all the members of it and hiring a new board. Like that's the kind of thing legally that I think can be addressed. The process by which you form these entities, by which you change board members on these entities, and then ensuring that the public, particularly the public that lives around these communities, has some sort of say, just like they would in any other rezoning case in your town.
Right. So in your article, you're saying that when documents were requested about the eligibility of these board members in the middle of a road in the middle of somewhere rural Texas, that the documents eventually provided showed the individuals were unqualified for office. Unqualified how?
That I don't know. I don't believe we reported the criteria by which it was suggested they were unqualified for office. It could be that they weren't residents of that area or that community for a specified period of time. Generally that's kind of the way it is. Like, as for example, if you run, for a statewide office in the state of Texas, you got to be a resident of your particular district for 6 months minimally, and have a property there that you actually physically live at. So it could be around those sorts of issues, but they weren't too clear on just exactly why they weren't unqualified.
Well, I mean, they're meeting in the middle of a road. That sounds shady enough, let alone having any kind of documentation to back it up. So, thoughts
so
on
that's one angle, Matt, of course, and then you have the feds, right? So
yeah.
then you have Scott Turner and Housing and Urban Development, and they're looking at it more, on the basis of large scale patterns of religious discriminatory of conduct. And, what they're looking at is, there's marketing materials that promote the development as strictly a Muslim community, and saying things like it's going to be the epicenter of Islam in America. I always tell people, like, they're explaining exactly what they're doing. It's like not a secret. And so when people come back and want to challenge it on the basis of people being discriminatory the other way, just folks that are concerned about these developments moving into their communities, I mean, they couldn't be more clear that, this is part of their caliphate effectively, right? And so they also have discriminatory financial terms. You have to kick into the mosque if you buy property in these developments, right?
Right.
Or some of their quote unquote educational centers. And then, they decide who gets what lot, right? So they're very biased or, very specific about who can buy into the community and who can't.
Well, I've seen this.
The Fair Housing Act prohibits precisely that type of discrimination.
Well, exactly. And I've seen this firsthand being from Northeast Indiana, Dearborn, Michigan. It's the capital there. They came in and just took Dearborn over the Muslims. And now the city council, the boards, everything runs that town. And it's exactly what we're seeing here. So you were kind enough, my man. We've got Chris Putnam here. He is the CEO of DallasExpress.com on the phone. You were kind enough. You said you had a little bit of tea on the Dallas ISD walkouts and protests that I'm going to cover in hour 2. Tell me what you know.
Well, it's speaking of metastasizing, the walkouts are as well, right? And
yes.
It's all, again, I know I've used this term a couple of times on this broadcast, but if you're being intellectually honest, you understand that this is all very purposeful. And in this case, you have a lot of public school administrators and or teachers that are encouraging or even promoting these walkouts. There was one in Boswell the other day. Got the principal on a megaphone telling him he's going to protect the students. There was another huge one at Arlington Heights in Fort Worth, and then yes, the ones that are mentioned in the current Paxton investigation. Well, here's the thing: they're doing it because they haven't cut off the money, as you know. The state funds students having their rear ends in seats on a daily basis, but the requirement is that they're sitting in there by 10 a.m. And then if they're there by 10 a.m., the money's funded. And so what they're looking at right now, and by the way, they've issued these quote unquote strongly worded letters. They're telling people, this is the TEA, Mike Morath and the TEA. They're telling districts, hey, you could be subject to losing state funds. But they haven't taken any action yet. And part of the reason they haven't taken any action is because it's going to require some kind of rule change with respect to that, that 10 a.m. situation, because, most of the time these kids are leaving well after that, or the administrators know the rules. And so they're purposely working around those rules to help encourage these walkouts. And effectively what they're doing is they're trying to promote a kind of a version of what we saw in Minnesota without, a lot of that violence, of course, but they're trying to create purposeful disruption. And sadly, a lot of our public school administrators and educators are promoting it. There's just no question about it. We've done multiple stories about it.
Well, Chris, I certainly appreciate you. 30 seconds. Go ahead and plug Dallas Express.
Yeah, DallasExpress.com. 500,000 subscribers now. We have 1 million social media followers. More empirically read, the Dallas Morning News and Star Telegram, who are incredibly far left. And the most important thing is we are 100% Texas owned and Texas operated, unlike the New York City Morning News, who's owned by Hearst Media, and the Star Telegram, which is owned by a New Jersey hedge fund that bought it from a bankrupt California company. So the only thing Texas about those outlets are the name and the title.
Well, Chris Putnam, CEO Dallas Express, thank you for joining me here on WBAP.